I was lucky because this weekend, it was a horror trifecta for me. Because first it was The Long Walk, then it was this Hulu documentary, Blood and Myth, and then it was Weapons, which for some reason or the other did not, wasn't shown at local cinemas here. But I was eager to watch this one, and it finally came online. There was a lot of hype around this movie. There's that famous story about how Jordan Peele fired his management for not securing the rights to this because apparently what's it called? The movie, the script was submitted and I don't know if this is to be believed or not. The script was submitted at 8 a.m. in the morning to the studio, and by 9 a.m. it was picked up and already greenlit. So that's how everyone in Hollywood and their aunt or uncle were desperate to get a hold of this, and there was a whole bidding war and stuff, and rightfully so. This is written by Zach Cregger, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, of Barbarian fame. Another very interesting horror film, and this one is equally interesting is maybe not doing justice to this movie. It is a very well crafted film. It is a very good story. I will say that it keeps you hooked until the very last moment. And for horror films, unlike for example Hereditary, it does have. It gives you closure. It has a really good payoff as well. But I wonder in writing this story, in not whether or not, definitely, they could have reconsidered the runtime on this, because this movie runs almost 2 hours plus. And in telling this non-linear story, in which you have various characters and their stories or points of view told separately and then brought together, I wonder if not maybe abandoning that type of storytelling, but perhaps in telling maybe a more leaner story, we could have gotten a better film. I think I could have done with a movie that was at least maybe 20, 25 minutes shorter. Simply because you have the latter half, the finale of this, and of course the entire mystery of this movie going on. But then there are these, as the kid would say, side quests, and these, kind of things that go on that kind of divert your attention, that take you away from a premise that is so engrossing. And for those of you who have not seen the movie or will be seeing the movie and just seen the trailer, it starts off in this small town, I think in Pennsylvania or whatever. And at 2:17 at night, these 17 kids from one particular class, they all just disappear without a trace. All that remains of that very class is the teacher, played by, I think, Julia Garner, if that's her name, and this kid. And as one can imagine, it throws this town into utter disarray and confusion. And audiences themselves are have to grapple with this particular thing, because I'm not saying it's a parallel, but school shootings and whatnot. So one can almost imagine what it's like for a community to lose an entire classroom full of kids. And then the question is how? Why? Where do these kids disappear to in the middle of the night? All with this almost Naruto run into the darkness. That is, of course, the premise of this story. And it delves, the script, of course, okay, let me get that in a second. That is, of course, the initial plot line. It's introduced, and then, of course, you have each character that is introduced separately. Well, sort of like, they're introduced with their own storyline, and sort of those characters then help build towards this narrative that leads us to the main, what's it called, of course, the finale and its conclusion. I don't mind the fact that the story is told in such a fashion. But as I said, when you have that initial hook, when you have something like that is immediately, sort of like, if I was a studio head and I was reading it, and sort of like you start off the story with that one thing, kids disappearing at night, what are they to do? How, sort of, you already sort of have built up this mystery there. You're like, yes, let's greenlight this right now. But then I think it tends to meander. It tends to get kind of stuck in the weeds, where you have these characters. You have, of course, the class teacher, you have a cop, you have one of the bereaved parents played by Josh Brolin, you then have the school principal played by Benedict Wong. You have all of these people, and yes, they're sort of building layer by layer this mystery, but I think that we don't really get, until that point, we only get, forget jump scares and sort of like, someone's knocking on your door at night and all of that stuff. There are some really creepy moments. There's that one where she's lying in bed and she looks up and there's something on the ceiling, and that freaked me the fuck out. That was, yeah, especially because whatever that sort of Harley Quinn looking character was, I don't know what, but we are introduced to that person in a bit. But I don't think that sort of like, so the shit does not hit the fan until that one scene where that Harley Quinn character, who turns out to be that one kid who's saved from who's been spared the fate of the other children in that school, in that classroom, she comes paying a visit to the principal, who has decided to call Child Protection Services. And she's this really weird looking person with like, this bright sort of almost orange wig, comical clownish lipstick and, makeup. And then she performs witchcraft. And that's when this movie goes like, oh my God. Then you're like, where is this film going to take you? Because it goes wild after that. And that's where I feel that the build-up, I really wish the build-up could have been sort of like, compressed somehow, made a little more concise, so that at least when we do get like really stuck into this movie, at least we are rewarded a little more sooner, I would say. I'm not saying that like, every movie has to be like an hour 30 or something like that. But, I really wanted more, because I hate, and for example, you might notice this on, for example, TV, with series, like especially Amazon series are like, they are guilty of this, where you have like a 10 episode season. Stranger Things, oh my God, that shit is particularly guilty of this sin, in that you have like a 50-minute episode, and 45 minutes of that episode, honestly, 45 minutes is just like, them dicking around. Nothing happens in the story, nothing progresses. It's just like, why do I have to suffer through this? And then literally in the last 5 minutes of the episode, you have enough of a reveal in the story to keep you going until the next episode. And then again, it's that same cycle again. 45 minutes of complete shit and 5 minutes of a reveal. I don't like that. And that's what I felt in that sort of, in these sort of compartmentalized stories, in these separate stories being told for these characters, and then bringing it together. I wish those stories had just been brought down a bit. Of course, everything else about the movie, the filmmaking, the score, the acting, the witchcraft, all of that stuff is just really, really well done. There's this thing I noticed, and I've been trying to make sense of it for the past couple of days ever since seeing the movie. But there's this particular focus on these consumer products in this movie. I'm not saying it's product placement, but like, you will see a character like bring like a can of Coke and place it in front of another character. Or you see these other characters, they're sort of in a supermarket and they've got like, they're holding up like, Fruit Pebbles and stuff like that. And I think that serves as this stark contrast of this sort of modern, man-made, tangible sort of reality as opposed to the arcane, supernatural chaos that this witch character brings into the movie. Because she brings this almost, well, it is a supernatural energy, but I mean sort of the means of that sort of thing is her getting this twig from this poison tree and sort of snapping it, like she gets hair and wraps it around, and then she sort of douses it in blood, and then like, the minute she snaps, that's when she weaponizes the people into becoming these, as Josh Brolin character, like, these heat-seeking missiles, like they just go crazy. And that's, I think, my interpretation at least of having, these consumer products which are sources of comfort to many, which are understandable, easily rationalized. They are almost symbols of order, and then contrasted to this something that is beyond human conception, witchcraft, and something that you just, again, boggles the mind. I really like that. At least that's sort of my reading of it. The finale is amazing, simply because, like in Hereditary, like those bloody devil worshippers, they or whatever those, I don't know, the devil worshippers, witches, I don't know, whatever those guys were. They kind of like, they win. Not in this case. And I think that it is so satisfying to see these kids who have been punished so get their own back. Like that. Really good. So I think sort of in terms of like, horror movies for this year, what's it called? Weapons definitely ranks among the best, of course. I would say, is it the best? I'm not sure. We've still got a couple of months left in the year. So maybe you can check in then when I do a roundup. But sort of so far, I would say yes, one of the best horror movies that I've seen this year.